I'm going to very quickly review how to solve a quadratic equation. So the first question says, what is a quadratic equation? So a quadratic equation is an equation, which means it has an equal sign, that contains x squared. So it's an equation that has x squared. So in the past, when we've been solving for x, we usually just get x by itself. So I have two different scenarios and problems in which I have to solve. So I have two examples. So if I look at example 1, I want to get x by itself. So if I wanted to get x by itself, what am I going to do first? Well, I would add 25 to both sides. So now I have x squared equals 25. So now what am I going to do to get x by itself? Well, I'm going to square root both sides to get rid of that squared. So x equals 5, right? However, you got to be really careful because, ladies and gentlemen, whenever you take a square root of a number, it's not just a positive solution. It could be positive 5, but it could also be negative 5. So I have to remember plus or minus. So you might want to write that down as a helpful note. Whenever I square root, answer is always plus or minus. Your answer is always going to be plus or minus because it could be a positive 5 or it could be negative 5, because whenever I square a positive or a negative number, the outcome is still going to be positive. So that's one way I could solve it. If I look at another example, let's look at example 2. If I wanted to solve this the same way I solved example 1 by getting x by itself, am I ever going to be able to add x squared and x together to be able to get it completely isolated? Well, no, I can't. I can't because they don't have the same, they're not the same type of term. This x squared is, this x is squared and this x is singular. So when you have an x squared and an x, a light bulb has to go off in your head and your brain has to go, oh, I have to factor. So in order to factor, your equation must equal 0. So I'm going to write my equation must equal 0. So how I know to make my equation equal 0, I'm just going to move my constant to the other side. So I'm going to add 8 to the other side. So I'm going to have x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. So I have to factor. So the first question I'm going to ask myself is there a GCF? There's not a GCF, so all right, cool. I'm going to do the x method. 8 goes on the top, 6 goes on the bottom. Factors of 8 that make 6, 4 and 2. So x plus 4, x plus 2. On the front, this is where we'd circle our answer and be done. But because I have this equal sign tells my brain I have to go an extra step, which means I have to separate each of my factors. So every time I see a multiplication sign, I'm going to separate my factors. So I'm going to separate it here. And I'm going to set up two equations. So this could say x plus 4 could equal 0. Or I can say x plus 2 could equal 0. So now I'm going to solve. If I solve for x over here, what's x going to equal? Negative 4. If I solve for x over here, what's x going to equal? Negative 2. And I'm done. So not every problem requires you to factor. Like if example 1, I did not have to factor this problem because I only had an x squared. Example 2, I had an x squared and an x, which made me have to go through the factoring process. So I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to let you loose, and I'm going to have you try these on your own, and then you can check your answers with the key online. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm going to do number 3. So if I look at number 3, first off, I know I'm going to have to factor because I see b squared and I see b. So I got to make this equal 0. So I'm going to subtract 4b. And when I subtract 4b, where does 4b belong? Does it belong first, middle, or last? It belongs in the middle. So I'm going to do b squared minus 4b plus 4 equals 0. So now I got to factor. Because my leading coefficient is 1, I do not have to factor with the x. I can factor really quickly in my head because the x only helps me, is really helpful when I have a leading coefficient. So I need factors of 4 that make negative 4. I know that's going to be b and b. So factors of 4 that make negative 4, what are they? Negative 2 and negative 2. So on the front side I was finished, But on the back, I'm not finished because this equal sign tells me I gotta split up my answers and solve. So I'm going to say b minus 2 equals 0, b minus 2 equals 0. So b equals 2 on the left, and on the right, b also equals 2. So I clearly don't have to write it twice. I write it once, and I'm finished. So go ahead and try these problems on your own, and we will go over them when I see you next.